Episode 7.
What's up, dude?
This is gonna be a good one because I'm live on caffeine right now. Episode 7. We are doing Tucker Carlson with Dave Ramsey. The title is kind of clickbaity. The Trump versus Kamala plan. If you think this is a political podcast and you don't like that, skip the last 5 minutes of the podcast. It wasn't that great of a party anyways. I picked this podcast because I'm not a big Dave Ramsey fan. And I gave it a shot. And about 5 minutes in, I was loving the conversation. And I've changed my opinion of Ramsey a little bit. Not completely. I think he gets a lot of it right. Not all of it. So we'll dive into that. I thought it was a 59. Conley, what did you think?
I'm gonna change it from the rating I gave it on the notes. I'm gonna give it a 64. 64.
The peer pressure downgrade.
So I was really curious of why you wanted to do the podcast. So when I saw you give it a 59, I was like, okay, this is tracking more than what I was expecting from Sterling.
So I really there's an obvious theme of things that I'm very interested in right now. And it's kind of right down the center for me. These systems that we have that everyone takes for granted is not your friend. The healthcare, the political, and the financial sector, not your friend. They're not looking out for you. And this is kind of right in line with that. But the other thing is I'm trying to have a better forecast of macro changes coming our way. I think that right now, especially in our lifetime, these macro changes have been as impactful to the financial security of ours and our future as how hard you work at work. And predicting them is hard because everyone, you can go and you can find predictions that say one thing versus total opposites, and they're both convincing. And I just have an interest in macroeconomics. I think it's a very interesting subject. So I try to make it well-rounded. I have a couple other podcasts that are kind of, they like debt. They think that's the way to go. And they think inflation is going to take your piggy bank if you don't play the games that they want to play. So I picked this one because I'm trying to figure it out myself.
Can you explain that? I think that's very important because I think most of the time people just choose one of these sides and they don't really listen to all. And it's very applicable to really how much money you make, I think. I think the biggest misconception with all these financial people is that it's a one answer for everyone when it's really not. But
Yeah.
when you go into why taking on debt would be a good thing and how inflation, like the role inflation plays in that.
Sure. So let's see. I'm not a financial coach, but here's what I got. Here's what I figured out, right? If you keep your dollars in cash and inflation hits you at 10% a year, your buying power at the end of that year is 10% less. Now, what I think a lot of people don't get, especially those that aren't financially literate, is that if you have assets and they inflate 10%, you now have 10% more buying power than someone that doesn't have assets.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing you have to understand is the way the government takes your money is not just taxes, it's also inflation. And every time they hand out a little stimmy check, every time they forgive student loans, that is inflating your dollar, your salary. And the big fight I'd like to focus on is beating inflation.
So if someone was doing what we're doing, podcast, and doing the follow-up, I think that was the quote they would have took from this podcast, is that, what do you say? Inflation is the way the government combats their debt.
It's another form of taxation.
Oh, another form of taxation. That's what it was. Yeah, that's so hard to see. It's it's so hard to find that was actually what they're doing with inflation.
What I like to tell people that early in their career is if the inflation year over year is 10%, and you get a 3% raise at the end of the year, your salary has decreased next year. On paper, you'll get 3% more dollars, but in real life, you'll get 7% less spending value.
I think so. I think people in that boat. Can you explain why I think inflation is 10%? Because I think that's to get to that point of view, you have to have the understanding that inflation is 10% or 8%. Like if you think it is only 2 or 3%, like you're told, then you probably think everything's okay and you want to go the savings route.
Yeah, my mentor told me you to understand something, to really understand it, you got to look at the data. What is the data telling you? You got to go and see it, and then you got to go with your gut. There's three inputs to making decisions and kind of reading the temperature of the room. Yes, the data, the CPI data, the print is at
Yeah.
3%. The CPI is the government's reported inflation percentage.
Mhm.
Right. There's some economists out there that'll tell you 2% is healthy. It stimulates the economy enough, but it doesn't deflate the value. We famously got to 9% last year, right? Which is
Was CPI at 9%? Or is that what people were saying inflation was at?
CPI was at 9% at the
Wow.
peak. So that means we are
I
at
didn't know
9%
that.
more inflation than we were.
Dude, that's crazy. 9% inflation. And that's what they're telling us the number is too.
Right.
So you gotta think that's probably on the low side.
But back to your inputs, your eyes are telling you your grocery bill has doubled in the past 2 years, right? You can look at the receipt on the grocery bill and say this 3% doesn't track. You can also look at your gut. Does your money go as far as it used to, or is it just 3% less valuable? And I think if you look at those two things, they're telling you the data that the government is giving you is not true. You can dig into CPI. They exclude a lot of stuff. They also use this like antiquated, let's just call people and ask them
Mhm.
how much they spent on their rent. And you get all those biases of like same as polling, right? You get all the who's answering that phone call and spending 30 minutes with that person.
Mhm.
And it's like we have all this digital data now. Actually look at what the price was for milk last year at Walmart and look at it now. It seems like relevant data to me, but does our highly sophisticated government know it? No, no, they don't.
You know what? I like to this is kind of a funny one. I like to base my inflation off a Chipotle bowl. Like it's like because it changes so much. And like I'm very like cheap with certain things and like restaurants and eating out. That's one of those things. And so I like know like how much I spend on a Chipotle bowl. So like to see how much has gone up is crazy. So Core Life is pretty similar to Chipotle. And when I was in high school, it was like the expensive place. That like you didn't go there because it was too expensive. You didn't want to spend $12 on lunch. And Chipotle, you get away with $8.50 was a Chipotle bowl.
Mm-hmm. And you get a lot.
Yeah. And
Yep.
it's not there anymore. I think that was before queso, before the queso or guac, which at the time was I think $1.25, $1.75, and now it's like $3.25.
I do a steak bowl of guac every day. It's $14.73 right now. I can tell you exactly how much it costs.
Yeah, so that's a small example, but that's kind of like my day to day how I interact with inflation.
So, do you budget? It sounds like you budget.
Not greatly. I think about 8 months ago I sat down. Right. Our main concern was the house we want to be able to buy in the future. So I looked at basically how much we needed to save each year for in like 4 years to be able to buy like a $400,000 house with the 20% down, and that's without the sale of our current. So just like savings account or investments account, how much money we need to have to be able to buy that house in that price range in that year. So I worked back from there and said we need to save this much each year. And so our plan is strictly we're saving this much and the rest can be spent however. So as long as you're not pulling from that savings and investment account, then we're good to go. And that's our financial planning.
Where did you learn how to budget when you started?
Um, like
You just
that
intuit it?
strategy.
Yeah.
That was just, yeah, intuitive.
Because I'm guessing it wasn't school. I'm guessing it wasn't
No,
like mom and dad literally taught you how to budget.
yeah, no, I think, um, I mean, that just made sense to me. It's like, in my future, what do I want to be able to have buying power for? Like, how much do I need to save? Because like investing is literally like you're planning for your future. So like in my future, what am I going to need to buy? What are the prices of things going to be at that point? And then just working back from that. I think it's actually kind of funny because last night I was talking to a friend I haven't seen in a long time. He was asking me like how many kids I want to have, and he's like, he was worried he was uh, like behind the ball because he wasn't married yet. I was like, dude, you're fine. And he was like, well, like when do I need to have kids by? I'm like, well, just the age of like women at like 35 starts to get more high risk of uh, pregnancy, and so it's work back from that. How many kids do you want? You know,
Mhm.
so you got to know what you want and then just work back from it. There's a
Right.
lot of things.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I've never budgeted, but it's like it's crazy to think I've never been taught how to budget either. I'm 34 years old. Never, no part of my education, my upbringing, nothing involved a budget.
Well, do you think so? What do you think that is? Because I kind of feel like it's something you have to learn yourself. It's like a coming of age thing. Like you're not going to take it serious till you're an adult or you're acting like an adult, which for people varies from age 16 to 40 or however far. And then also it's going to be so different for everyone. It's like how do you I mean maybe you teach like a high level like idea like that of like what do you want in the future, work back from it, how much money you have,
Hmm.
how does that fit your plans? Maybe that's like something you can teach, but I think it's so dependent on the people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but like, it's so fundamental. The fact that they don't teach it just drives me nuts. Right? It wouldn't be hard to teach. It wouldn't be hard to teach what inflation is, what interest rates are and do.
I
And
think those
I
would be good
agree,
ones
like,
to teach.
yeah, but experience, yeah, is the best way to learn. 100%. But there's so, like, the fact that when you're getting experience for the first time, it's when you're deciding to take out six figures of student loans that can never be forgiven, credit cards that are 25% interest rates if you're late. Like, all those traps are at the beginning of the game.
That's very true. Yeah, and if you don't have kind of the mentors in your life, the parents, the
Hmm.
siblings, the cousins to teach you that stuff, I mean, especially if your parents are doing it, like how are you not going to do that yourself?
Right. And I I definitely think mom and dad looked at like mine and yours and said, yeah, engineering will pay for itself. Like if we would have done gender studies, I think dad would have sat us down and be like, this isn't a good investment. But at the other hand, like I signed up for almost 50K of student loans. And there's never really like a conversation with mom and dad, like, is this a good
Never.
investment? What is the percent on those loans? It was kind of just like I was going to college. There's no question about it. I wanted to do this at this school. This is what it takes to do that. And we just kind of went with it.
Yeah. So there wasn't much thought about the loan. It just kind of made sense for you.
Yeah. And I'm blessed that it worked out.
Yeah. I was very lucky. I think I was very lucky and I didn't get accepted many places. Because I very well could have been the person to spend $60,000 on college. I could have landed maybe a better job. I think I would have landed a better job. So it's hard to
Yeah.
say. Because I think out of college, I mean, those top companies are looking where you, it's bottom line. They don't care if you had a really good GPA with, unless you like started an app or something, you know, like the accolades are, I think the biggest thing was schools, you know, those top companies. So maybe it would have paid for itself, but it's hard to say, like, you have to be a top performer at those schools too.
Right.
I think the biggest thing really is just the network. Like if you have a friend who's in the same field and they go work at Amazon. I have more friends at these high level companies. And I think it was Dan Martell podcast, and he was saying that 80% of Google employees have a recommendation when they get the job,
Yeah.
internal recommendation.
Yeah. That
That
works.
that statistic is burnt in my head. I'm like, all right, we need to really think about who we're spending time with, reaching out to, stuff like that. So yeah, I was on the other end of the spectrum where I didn't take much money out because I got into kind of a mid-tier school. It worked out.
That's super. I mean, if you like going back, if you would have done the math, you might have you might have came to that conclusion.
Yeah, it's hard. I know I wouldn't have done the math. I think my ambitious eyes would have let me go wherever the biggest, fanciest place was. I'm almost 100% sure that would have been the case.
Yeah. So the like 5 minutes into this podcast, he dropped that stat about $37,000. Like the average credit card debt for an American is $37,000, and like I was just casually listening, and then that stat hit, and I was like, I'm locked in now. Isn't that crazy?
So that's one of those stats that you have to second guess. You can't just take at face value. Like that is absurd. Because that means and was that credit card debt? What type of debt was that?
Credit card debt, which is
That's
terrifying.
crazy. Like you telling me that's true. I don't know. I really want to believe that's not true. Like I want to hear, dude, hopefully that wasn't a polling statistic. Like where did we get that? It's like
Right.
with all these other stats, right? We hear stats from other people and we second guess it. Why are we not second guessing that one? Because that one's absurd.
You don't have to run an experiment the right way to figure out the number.
Yes, but did he
It's
get it the right
Visa.
way?
It's Visa. What is your average customer debt?
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Well, that's their average customer debt, right? Like, could it be skewed in the fact that the people who don't have debt don't have Visa credit cards? Like, if that's a Visa stat,
Yeah, I mean
that's
maybe.
regardless of the fact. So say it is true, right? It is 100% factual. How much credit card debt do we have? I have zero.
I pay it off every month. So we go to like,
Like, okay, so like that's most people I know. So that means these
what
people
is
like
it?
are
Is
having.
the reason I believe it is I don't think people are honest about it. Be my guess. I think maybe they're good at it for a little bit, and something happens, and there's a big payment on it, and then all of a sudden they're behind, and then it snowballs, and they're not coming to you and saying, "Well, I really fucked up on this."
That's
You know,
that's a very good point. I think I see more of that when like you see those people. It's like, how's that teacher and firefighter having two brand new
right?
trucks and SUVs and a
Right.
$400,000 house? It's like, mm, that's weird. That's suspicious. But you
Right.
see it a lot. So
And
yeah,
like the so I make a good living, but we still have to like watch our spending, and it's still like it's something you have to worry about, which is crazy. Like, thank you, inflation. But what I tell Leslie is like, man, other people are going to fail before we do, right? If this inflation gets higher, which it looks like it will for longer, we're not going to be the ones that break first.
yeah. Me and Karen have the same conversation because it's like I'll be like, dang, that's expensive, and she's like, yeah, man, we need to make more money. I'm like, well, imagine the people who are making the United States average amount of money. Like, that would be tough. Like we're very blessed. And to
I
think
wonder
that
what the average income is.
last time I heard it was like 50.
So they got 37K in debt. I mean, that's over half a year's pay. And
Okay,
if they're
so
hitting 20% on that a
2024,
month,
SoFi, this is from SoFi. In 2024, the national average salary was 63,000.
but if you're 37,000 in debt and you're at, let's say, a 20% credit card rate, then that means the interest on
It's
that
sad.
is $7,000. Did I do my math right? $7,000 a month just to pay off interest, to not make the debt go up. 7,000 a year. I'm sorry. I think I did that wrong. But golly.
Yeah. And that average salary, it says it's the sum of all divided by the number of workers. So that's a little skewed because it's including the 1% that's making.
Yeah, but 7,000 a year of a 63 $1,000 salary is like what, 11%? So eleven
And
percent
that's
of your
before taxes
salary
on the salary too. So they're only
already
seeing,
going to Visa.
yeah, they're only seeing like what, 70% of that salary.
And that's like everything is about exponential, either give or good or bad, right?
Hmm.
This is a bad exponential problem because the more you have, the farther you fall behind. The farther you fall behind, the more debt you take out. The more debt you take out, the farther you fall behind. And it's
And
like
then, do you think
these
you want to
spirals
work?
are nasty.
Like it has to be a lot harder to work because you're working to pay off something and you don't even get to see the money you work for. So
Yeah,
like that compounding in a negative way is very true.
that's crazy.
Any thoughts to solutions to, is it just education? Because
Well,
we kind of went down the rabbit hole of like explaining the problem, right? And it's kind of
yeah.
sad to look at. You got any thoughts on what needs to happen? Do people need to listen to Ramsey more? What's
I
the
think this is where
solution?
Ramsey's good. If you have a debt problem, you have a discipline problem. I think this extreme anti-debt, super cheap until you figure your way out of the hole is probably the best solution. I mean, I look at Ramsey's like financial advice as like the equivalent to what do you call it when alcoholics go to rehab? It's like rehab. Like don't spend anything out, don't go on any vacations, drive this beater car. Like it's an extreme cold turkey. Get your shit together. Get out of this death spiral, which is probably good advice. And then once you're out, then you can start ramping back your life to normal.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I say he gets the most heat for people who are like think he's supposed to be for everyone, but he's not for everyone. It's for a specific like group of people. And he's really good for that
Yeah.
group of people. And
I
then
feel like it's like an entry level class. You have to graduate out of it because,
yeah.
like, at first glance, all debt's bad. I don't think that's true. I think there's good debt and bad debt, right? Because if if your strategy is as little expenditure as possible and just save it all, right? Then you're going to get your head kicked in by inflation. And I also think the income part of it. I mean, he talks about it a little bit. I'll give him some credit. So like I was of this mindset that Ramsey was just all don't spend, don't spend, don't spend, be cheap, be cheap, be cheap, living by your means type of. But he does go past that. He talks about getting other jobs and stuff. But I mean, I guess my advice to my son would be go make a ton of money. Go work your butt off and make a ton of money so you don't have to think about it. Right? Don't get into big traps. Avoid the 25% interest rate credit cards. But at the same time, go make a lot of money and don't stop there. When you make a lot of money, make 10% more next year and 10% more next year and go beat inflation. And then if you do that, it's hard, but if you do that and you don't make any crazy mistakes on the other end, you'll be fine. You don't have to think about it.
So there's this quote that got me fired up to start applying for jobs when I left my first job. And it's from Elon Musk. And it was like, once you find out it's easier to make an extra $10,000 than to save $10,000, you'll be on your way.
Yeah.
You'll start growing. And I was just sitting there, I was like, I mean, he's got to be right. And then I started my journey of applying for jobs again and stuff. But I think it's a mindset thing,
Yeah. And this
knowing you can work hard to make more money too.
mhm. This system we're in, if it was a free market economy with no inflation, that would be a very good strategy, right? Just save as all you can, and then once you have a huge nest egg, anything on top of that, you could kind of pick and choose your investments and stuff, and be very conservative about it. But I think this system that we have, you gotta have good debt to stay ahead.
Okay, so note from this section is it's good debt versus bad debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you mentioned the system. I think Ramsey. I think the main takeaway I got from this podcast was Ramsey was able to explain why the system was really set up for nobody having for these people not having success. And one of the things he talked about was friction of payments. And this is so true to me. I have firsthand experience. I use Apple Pay. I think you're the same way, where it's like
Hmm.
it's so much nicer to use Apple Pay. If I'm checking out online someplace, I will
Oh
spend
yeah.
2 or 3% more to
Yep.
use Apple Pay on my phone than to have to enter my credit card on the website. And he explained the logical like the explanation of why they're getting that, why people are spending more, because you're subconsciously not like trading anything. Like,
Right.
so like with the trade of money is you spend money and then you like get change back, or
I'll take it
you
one
give it.
further.
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever been on a website that you had to input your credit card and be like, it's not worth it?
Yep, so many times.
It's
Seriously,
like you have to do it. They have to reduce friction to one. Yeah, it increases the money you'll spend, all that stuff, but also you'll lose competitively if you don't take away that friction.
yeah. And what's really interesting is I'll talk to people and I'll tell them like if I'm on a website, I will not. I will go to another one. I'll go to another online pickup order food place if they don't have Apple Pay. People look at me like I'm crazy, but I think I just recognize it. I don't think other people recognize
Right.
that they will do that.
Right. And it's kind of like I look at if there's an Apple Pay on a website, I trust it. Right.
Yeah,
I'm
that
not
too.
putting my credit card out there on something I don't trust. Apple's really good about keeping your stuff in their hands in a lockbox that you can kind of trust. I think it's one of the best things Apple did.
So that's something else I really wanted to ask you was what are your thoughts on the credit card companies selling your information on like what you're purchasing and stuff? Like, do you care about it?
I care. It's not very high up on the caring list. And
So
I think
like,
it's because it's so like if they weren't selling it, the data's still out there and still being sold.
well, Ramsey was mentioning how everything besides gas he pays because it makes him spend more wisely.
Be more conscious about what you're spending and how
Yes,
much. I think that's
it
absolutely a
makes him
strategy you can
extravagant.
use. Yeah.
I I'm curious. So what they do with your information is they kind of make a profile for. They say who's calling price. He's this person who buys all this stuff, and they can know me pretty well from what.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They can know what content you're watching. Well, like if
Yep.
you're buying health food, if you like it's pretty obvious like what content will this person watch? Like are they buying somebody's product or an influencer's product? Are they buying AG1? Like if they're buying AG1 and they're buying grass-fed beef, they're probably listening to podcasts.
But let me ask you this: do you want your advertising to be better?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like,
I
I
kind of
think
do.
so. Yeah,
I kind of
okay.
do want them to know me more. Yeah, I might spend more, but it's kind of funny because I was watching on YouTube this morning, and there's an ad that popped up for a car loan. So it's not they got some work to do because this video was definitely trashing car loans. But yeah,
So, and that's where I wanted to get to. Is like, is that aspect of it like, is it bad in any way? I mean, it's annoying. They're making money off you because of that.
I mean
I'm
it's
not mad.
again tips to Apple. One of the reasons I'm with Apple now is because they have that option, ask not to track, and I do that with every single app. And
Yeah.
that's about as much as I'll worry about it. It's worth a click. It's not worth much more of my time.
Hmm.
I don't think it's fully in your control. I don't think you could fight it if you wanted to. So I just kind of I care, but not enough to have action. I was looking up while we listen to this. Um, how much we'll play a trivia game. How much percent of the world economy is financial services?
Like banking, like how much
Yeah,
the banks make
banking,
on like interest
insurance,
and stuff.
credit cards, loans.
14%.
25% by most estimates, right?
Not too far.
It's an estimate because it's a world economy. Come on. That's what we're spending a quarter of our wealth on, giving it to bankers. I understand, right? I know enough about financial services to know that they benefit the economy. They put the money in the right hands that and that money turns into great businesses that makes your life better. Awesome. Awesome. We need it. right? You can imagine being in a little village and not being able to buy your house because you can't afford all the lumber, right? And without a bank to loan you it, no one has houses. We're all in huts. So we need banks. We need financial services.
You don't need banks. I mean, like in that scenario.
You will
Yeah,
lose if you don't have banks.
okay, yeah, yeah.
I will beat
I'll
you
give
with
you,
a
yeah.
bank, right? If my tribe has a bank,
Yeah. Okay.
right? It's I like to think of it as financial
It's
engineering.
a
You hear that
competitive
sometimes.
advantage.
Yes, it is, right? Because you're putting your value in the most valuable thing, and I think that's what capitalism does great. Is it's not about anything but what brings the most value to the consumer. So, as a consumer, we like it. But do I think if I had to go and budget the world economy, how much would I spend on financial services? It wouldn't be 25%. It's the fact that they're in the middle of everything and they're just taking little pieces everywhere they go. Every little transaction has a fee on it. Every loan they make money on.
So is this so they're kind of like a middleman in all these situations, right?
Right. But like,
Is
so
this something
what?
that crypto solves? If you have these, because
I
like
think it's part of the promise.
I think yeah, that's so that's my thought is like these are problems that the centralized currencies, the centralized banks are supposed to be able to solve. Now the details behind that, not well versed in, but that's my understanding of the issues they're addressing. It's like, hey, these middlemen are taking way too much. We're gonna cut that cost
For
down
sure.
a smaller percentage.
Yep. Yep. I mean, your guess was what, 14? Like, just a swag, I would have said like 10%. Like, most of the value in the world is like these big internet companies and these big hardware companies and
Yeah,
oil,
but
commodities,
you
all
gotta
this
think
stuff.
the financial industry fuels all the other industries. Like most industries, even if you think about like the initial like finance would be like the seed investors too, right? Like the seed investors in all
Yep.
these companies, all the early
Yep.
investments, the mortgages on the buildings, the like, and they're what fuels like the growth of all these industries.
Right. So important, right? I want new companies. I want new businesses, especially in America. But like, dang, 25%? That's steep. That's steep.
That kind of so one thing Tucker said, which like made me kind of I haven't listened to a whole lot of Tucker, but he all the time he goes, I'm an idiot. He'll say that. He's like, I'm an idiot. I'm just kind of talking. And like it's kind of funny when he says that. But this was the first time where I was like, he's kind of a that was kind of a really bad idea. And he was talking about he was like, when I retire, I want to start a political party that is taking action against the financial industry. We'll have a bunch of people not pay their loans and make the banks fail. I'm like, did we not pay attention during 2020 and like the AMC thing where the big banks just get bailed out and everyone else has to suffer the consequences?
Yeah. I think that's the problem it would try to solve, right? Is like, man, I'm so mad they bailed them out.
But it's going to happen. And Ramsey kind of talked about it. He's like, there's gonna be some other downstream issues. And I'm glad he said that because if he didn't say that, I would have lost a lot of like I would have really been like, what? You guys not thinking through this issue, or are you just being stupid?
Right. But there's part of me. So I heard the Tucker idea and I loved it at first. Like, there's that anger in you. There's that emotional reaction, and he was. I give him props for recognizing it as emotional. But like the what was it? Wall Street Bets in the GameStop short. There's just something visceral about these guys are over leveraged and they screw you over every chance they get. They'll sell your grandma for a penny,
Hmm.
right? Those are these people. That's who you think of, and you know he referenced the Donald Trump line. I don't know if it came from Donald, but it's like, if you owe the bank $100,000, it's your problem.
Yeah,
If
it
you owe the
was
bank 100 million,
Donald.
it's their problem. I love that line, and there is a big part of my emotional reaction that was like, yeah, suck it. I would love to march on Wall Street and give them a big fat middle
But
finger and say you are over leveraged.
Isn't it inevitable though that they get bailed out?
It depends, right? I mean, they get bailed out by the government being captured by lobbyists and our politicians being freaking sellouts. And if the people really rallied, you can imagine the politicians. I mean, they're spineless creatures.
Now,
If I could describe our politicians, they are cowards. If the torches started marching at Wall Street, I could see some politicians flipping sides.
I think it gets silent. Like it wouldn't last that long. They just have too much backing. I think when you say the people, when you're talking about the people marching, the people getting together, in my head, I'm like, that is what a decentralized bank is. That's what
Are you
cryptocurrency is
old?
like. That is the solution crypto is trying to solve.
Yeah. Are
Decentralized
you old
banks.
enough to remember the 1%, the 99% protest on Wall Street? There was a movement. It's probably the last time the left and the right were on the same side. And they're like, hold on, why does the 1% make more than the 99%? And I think they were so close during that movement to making some real changes and differences, and they lost their focus. They got it. It's one of those, Dave Smith. We haven't done a Dave Smith podcast. He's one of my favorite podcasters. I think I talked about him on one of these, but he's always like, in 2012 when that movement was going on, that's when all the DEI and race stuff came out, and they got us fighting about abortion left and
Yep.
right,
Yep.
and they just brilliantly distracted us. But I'd like to think that there's a scenario where we tell the government to stop making decisions based on who contributed the most to your campaign fund, who's going to give you that job as soon as you get out of politics. Stop being spineless little bad words and do something for the American people.
I just can't imagine there's ever a big enough push. I think the only way you get out of that is innovation. These decentralized banks, and I don't know enough, I'll say it again, I don't know enough to explain it, but the premise at a high level is that they will be able to be more efficient. They'll be able to offer better rates because there's less overhead, less people need to get paid, right? And so I think you beat the problem with innovation in the industry, and that's what like America's always been like. The solution to the problem, I think, has always been innovation. And I think that's really the only way out of it. And I say that because there's so much entertainment now. Screen time has to be up so much. And when you're entertained, when you go home at night and you're entertained all night and you find enjoyment through whatever means of digital enjoyment, you're not going to worry about issues. You're not going to go out and complain about these things unless you're in a pandemic with COVID and you get bored of that entertainment. I think that's what happened in COVID, but they're still able to create all these other distractions, right? Like the issues were never these like kind of foundational issues. There are all these like kind of top level, surface level issues that were talked
Yeah.
about and debated.
I think your point about crypto is probably the main premise, which is you can't print. You can't, well, you can mine Bitcoin, but it's limited and it's going to get harder and harder mathematically. It's
It's
like a
baked in.
mathematical
It's
guarantee.
baked in what it is specific of how much is going to be mined for the next 40
Right.
years till it reaches a point where they're not mining
So
anymore. So
right.
it's
So it's
known.
essentially prescribed inflation, right? But it's at a number that's public and everyone's fine. The only people that benefit from that inflation are the miners that have to do all the work, right? So it's like a trade of services. You mine and make Bitcoin, you power the logs, then you'll get compensated in the inflated value instead of the inflation going to, you know, PNC Bank CEO.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, and I think that's why a lot of people believe in crypto. It's kind of like the promise. And I think it'll end up working. It's just like, I don't know. You're right. It's hard to picture a world where the politicians start behaving differently.
And I think that only happens in a world where the people, like, everyone gets together. but everyone's too distracted by these surface level issues,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing a great job of creating division.
Yeah, I like so he brought up so like if they didn't take taxes right out of your check and you actually had to go to the office and pay them, oh, there would be revolution. I completely agree. The
Yeah,
amount
well,
you got to give those guys is crazy.
that comes back to the friction of the payments.
Um, one of the things so Ramsey was, I think being the level-headed person and saying, I don't know if I'm in on these big conspiracies to like lower friction, so it's a more pernicious trap. But I think I tend to agree or disagree with that concept that there's got to be this massive conscious conspiracy to do these things, and people can't assign that much competency to these groups. But I've been on teams where you got the decision maker right here. He's got his right hand man that's just brilliant and can think about these social issues and says, if we do this, and that, this will net us more money. This will be a better situation for our business. The decision maker's like, you're smart. I trust you. Let's do it. They start winning the competition and everyone else copies. And all of a sudden, that it was just an idea from one person is now across the industry because, that's what it takes to win. And it doesn't take this giant cabal of evil minds. It just takes one person that is thinking about it logically instead of emotionally.
That innovates, right? That
Right.
creates better innovation.
Right.
Is it's performs better.
Right. I think about that a lot. I don't prescribe to the idea that all these conspiracies have to be this giant conglomerate of people all agreeing to this conspiracy. I think it can be a just small group that has a big impact.
Yeah, I agree.
I did want to talk about that so I talk about good debt, bad debt. I think if you're going to win this game, you got to have some debt. It should be good debt, but you got to have some debt. However, when I sold my second house, we made so much out of it that we paid off the debt, and geez, did that feel good. Like, we paid off the student loans, we paid off the cars, we had no credit card debt anymore. And that feeling that he talked about, if that's going to be what drives you out of debt, I'm telling you that at the end of that road, it feels good. It feels really good. Have you had friends that have gotten there yet?
No,
You're still too young.
yeah,
Which is
that
crazy
was
that you start this race in a negative position. Back to that. That sucks.
yeah. What's funny is so there's two things. At one point, he mentioned that if you put a message out there that implies people are doing something wrong, or it's like convicting to people, they'll come after you. I think that's very true.
Mm-hmm.
I think you gave the example like for health, like if you tell a parent that the health decisions, the food their kid ate is what made them sick, like it's hard to come to that conclusion that that's true because
Yeah,
that's implying that you were the fault, right?
that's right.
I think that's very true, even with finances, because there's a couple times in the podcast where we had just me and my wife just bought a new car, and we have two car payments on, and our car payment is the same as our mortgage, but our mortgage is very low compared to like where most people live, and so like I'm over here trying to justify it in my head, I'm like, no, it's a good purchase, it was a good purchase, and it was really hard, it was genuinely really hard to have an open mind and listen to him.
Yeah.
And I was able to kind of think through that. And I was like, yeah, he's probably right. I probably could have drove a beater and had thrown money in my 401k. And man, I still don't know if that would have been the better. I don't know. That just doesn't, I think that is too far of an extreme for me. I think I'm going to justify that purchase for us and say that I would have done it again. We'll see down the road if I agree with that. Uh, and that comes from like me having more of a growth mindset of uh,
What
make.
percent did you get on that loan?
I don't know specifically. I think it was like low fives. I think it was like 4.9 or 5. You're like low fives or high fours.
Yeah. And it's so like, look,
I know how
that's
much.
that's the good debt, bad debt. If when we're 10 years out of this and we look back at how low the interest rates were on loans across the board, I think a lot of people are going to say, if you took money out there, you made one of the best financial decisions of your life. Now, should it go to a Lamborghini? No, but if it's going to a Camry that's going to last you for 12 years and you can, it's not going to kill you financially, then I think you're
So here's a good example. And this is kind of also where I justified it because I was thinking through it. So when
Mhm.
I like 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I bought a new car, a brand new car. And they talked in detail about never buying a new car. And I always agreed with that. Like I was always the one looking at used cars and like it was stupid to buy a new car. But at the time, I went and got Elantra and I went and test drove a used one with 30,000 miles and it was like $2,000 less than new. So in my head, it made sense. And this is when the
Yeah,
car
the used
market
car
was
market was
crazy.
nuts.
It
Yep.
was crazy. But
Yep.
so I got the car for 27,000. Granted, I paid all. I think the biggest thing that you don't see is all the extra fees. So the sticker price 27 like 8. And I got out the door after my interest I have to pay for like 32,000. So like $5,000 in extra fees. I think that's where you lose more. But I looked at the price of my car now, 2 years later, with 33,000 miles on it, and it is like $24,000. So the sticker price of the car has only dropped 3 grand in 2 years.
Yeah,
So that seems
that's awesome.
justifiable for me. I put 34,000 miles on it, going from price of the car then versus now. But when you consider I haven't paid all the interest yet, right? Because the car loan's still going. But I mean, I lost the money in like the fees and docking services, whatever, the dealership. But like looking back on it, like, yeah, it's not too bad of a purchase, I don't think. But yeah, it hurts to have to pay that monthly payment. And we are now paying it double, so we get done next year for that car payment.
Yeah, and
So
so there's ways to be smart about it.
yeah,
I think you're right. I think that's the next level. Like if you want to start your financial literacy at Ramsey, that's a great place to start. But I think that conversation is the next conversation. It's like the way I got out of debt was by my asset, the only asset I really owned, which was my
dude,
house,
you that was
inflating.
such a that was so like sorry to interrupt you, but you know how you say like it's like go to locations that flourish your career. One of the biggest things you got away from living in California was your home price increasing. Like just your geographical location itself. Like you benefited so much from that. I'm sorry I interrupted you there, but I've thought about that so many times. Like that alone was like probably worth the move out there for what 4 or 5 years,
5
7 years,
years.
5 years.
Yeah, that I mean the house almost doubled as a 80% increase over 4 years. But if you think about it, I made that money by taking on debt.
Mhm.
I didn't pay 375,000 down and sell it for I don't know 500,000. I didn't have that money, so I took out debt to the tune of 375, and then sold it because that asset increased in value. That's how you use. That's good debt, right? I
Mhm.
had a very low mortgage rate on it, and if you just look at the wrong way to think about it is I took out a mortgage at 4%, and over the first 4 years, I paid more in interest than I did in principal, right?
Mhm.
Because the mortgages are primarily interest to the last. So
That's an important thing that people early on need to understand. Look up the chart of principal versus interest for mortgages. I think most 20-year-olds would be surprised
right,
because
but
yeah,
if you
go ahead.
just made that analysis, you wouldn't have bought the house,
Mhm.
right? You would have said it's cheaper to rent, and then I wouldn't have walked away with six figures of realized gains when I sold my asset. And so it's like there's levels to this. And, I'm hoping to level up. That's why I keep listening to podcasts like these. But be financially disciplined. Don't fall into the pitfalls. Learn that first, but then secondly, if you want to compete in this world, you have to make good debt decisions, and you got to turn profits. Like if you just sit and don't go into debt, you're falling farther and farther behind because of how they inflate things.
Yeah, I think a very important thing is to work through this process. Like we just talked about these initial ideas that were thrown out on this idea, and then we went 4 layers deep in to see if that was like the right thought for in our situation, right? Like don't just take everything for surface value. So when they say don't take on debt, like think that, question that, It's like no, there can be good and bad debt.
And there's other voices out there, right? Robert Kiyosaki is the rich dad, poor dad. He's the biggest, like, no, debt is the way to financial freedom. Um, and I'd be careful doing that approach too, because if that was just marketably the case, everyone would just be super rich, apparently, because everyone's got a ton of credit card debt right now. So here's my bet right now. This is kind of what I've came to. Two things. One, we bought this house because of land. It's so hard to find land, a neighborhood house with land. I think in 5 to 10 to 20 years, that's going to make this asset more valuable than the house on it. So that's my current bet.
I
And then,
looked up in my county houses that had over an acre, and there were, I think, 3 in the entire county
and I think because
for
if you
sale.
look at every new neighborhood that they're building, that there's no yards.
Hmm.
They are side to side. They squeeze as many houses in there because their formula says the more houses I have in here, the more I'll profit. So good to them. They're doing right business. But I think that makes the supply of homes that have a yard, have a place where your kids can play and grow up. It's that supply is going to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. So I'm betting that the asset that has the yard is going to explode. That's my big bet right now. I mean, that's my gamble.
That's reasonable. I think also not only it's a good business plan because, like you said, like you make more money with more houses with less land. And I think most people don't care, which is kind of crazy. But even with that being said, I do agree. Land is a non-inflationary asset.
Yeah.
That's the beauty behind land. It's never
Well, it
inflated.
rises with inflation, right?
It's
Ideally.
deflationary because like you can't. If it's non-inflationary, that means you can't get it more.
I think the right way to say it is it inflates along with the money supply. Like so if you have an asset and you have inflation, it increases in value along with inflation. So you don't lose your buying power if it's not like what's inflating is the dollar, not assets. Assets don't inflate. So maybe you're right when saying it's
It's
not.
deflating against the value of the dollar. I think it sounds counterintuitive because we're saying D, which like makes you think it's getting less. But if it deflates, that means it's.
Yeah, relative to the dollar, it's
I think we're
increasing in
saying the same
value.
thing. Anyways, hopefully people understand that. Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. I'm in somewhat of a similar boat. There's a lot of ideas that like just stick in my head. It's very like it's like a sentence that I hear that like it really guides my decision making. So when I got my house, I was talking to my grandma and she said like she got a house like when they bought the first house when my grandma and grandpa got married, it was nearby where mine is. And I said, how much did you buy it for? She said $13,000. I looked it up and she bought it for $13,000 that year. I looked at the price today. It was like, I think about 28 years ago,
What
30
year do
years
you
ago.
think she bought it?
It was like 30 years ago. So,
So there's another data point. Do you think that's a 2% inflation a year? No, that's some
so
horseshit.
she bought it for 13,000. It was on the market for 106,000. So I told my wife, I said, that means in 30 years, our house is going to be worth over $1 million.
Yeah, if it 10x's again.
Like, and that's if inflation isn't a compounding thing where it increases at a faster rate. So because of that,
Yeah, what
I
it's
want to
really
hold
going to
on
be
to
worth
this
is
house.
one Bitcoin
Yeah. So like
because the dollar won't be there anymore.
because of that, I really plan is to be able to rent this house out. I think there's a lot of hiccups that come up with renting, but that's going to be what we're going to try.
Yeah, I always like that strategy of just, buy a home, save up enough to buy a second home and rent the first one out, and then buy a third one and rent the first two out. And that that's a I think you can win that way. I haven't been able to do it, but to me, and maybe this is just that I'm spoiled financially, but I think when you look at your spending just in terms of return of your financial health, you sell short other things. I like right now what I'm looking at is I'm not saving a ton of money. I make a lot and I spend a lot. And so I think I would get a tisk from Ramsey.
I would be
However,
pissed.
however, maybe this is just what I tell myself, but I spend a lot on food, but it's because it's healthy food. And I got 4 kids and they're all growing their brain right now. Like literally every night their brain is growing and it's growing using that nutrients. The yard I bought for them, are my kids going to be better having grown up in a yard versus inside staring at screens all day? I'm making a bunch of bets that cost money,
I would
but I
call
will
them
see a
investments.
return in
They're
having better
investments,
kids.
not bad.
Yeah, but you don't cash out that investment at the end. I don't sell my son for a return on an investment of 150%, right? It's
Yes,
like,
you don't sell them, right? But when they grow up and they have a successful career family, that is that payout,
yeah,
right?
but yeah. So I would just, I guess I'm saying, if you're out there and you're like zooming in on your budget and you're pinching every penny, I would make sure you're not doing it at the expense of your child's future, right? You have those like studies out there where people have more fluoride in their drinking water, 15 points lower in IQ, right? So a water filter that will cost you $300 up front that you put on your sink, and just every time your kids drink, they drink from that instead of the fridge. You're paying $300, which is a lot it's a luxury item for a water filter, but it's 15 points in their IQ. Like, imagine how much you would pay to just bump your IQ by 15 points.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Uh, I couldn't second one more. I think on top of that is so we're talking about investing your money. You don't
Mm-hmm.
don't forget your time is money, right? So investing your time in educating yourself in these podcasts is my point of view. I think it is the biggest thing, the biggest trap people fall into is after high school, college, they say I'm not learning anymore. And they stop learning that day. Like genuinely, like how many people
They
read,
stopped sprinting too.
yeah,
Have you seen that stat about
like 30, like, yeah,
95% of people don't sprint after their age 30?
yeah, dude. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And people don't care. They don't care. They're like, yeah, I'm not sprinting. I've said that to multiple people and they're like, yeah, I won't sprint again. It's like,
Yep, that's me.
but I think the bigger thing is, like investing in your education, like past the like, because these are things you don't learn. Like we said earlier, you don't learn about finances. You don't learn about health. Like you're told you can't learn about health, but you can.
Right.
Like you have so
Right. You
much
let your
time.
doctor handle that. You don't
Yeah,
need to
but
know.
instead you spend 4 hours a night watching TV or on your phone.
And I would also say, like, if you're the way to make your budget is to resell yourself on Facebook Marketplace and you're going to sell your leftover chair for $20, you're going to spend an hour of your time to earn $20. If your job pays more than $20 an hour, go do that for an hour. Work some overtime.
And that's such a growth mindset thing. Like that's why like it's so important to understand this compounding effect of like investing your time. Like how much is your time worth? I know we've
Yeah.
talked about this before, but it is so important. I think that's a great example of like how long did it take me to sell this thing for $20?
Right. And the more
Yes.
overtime you'll work, the better your review will be at the end of the year. Your boss will be happier with you. You'll get faster
You'll be
promotions.
smarter. Like, did you learn
Yep.
something in that
You'll be better
hour?
at your job. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
these are things, and again, you don't get taught these things unless you have like a really good mentor in your life, or you find out yourself.
Yeah, I've actually been like, whenever I listen to these podcasts, it's like, all right, I think it's an atrocity. How am I going to teach my kids? Like, I can't be the same way. I'm going to go do that.
What's so I I'm I'm gonna ask a question and I'm gonna give some information. So what is your answer to that? Like, how do you teach your kids that? Because when I was growing up, this is the information I'm gonna try. So when I was growing up, my dad would take me to like basketball tournaments and stuff, like hour, 2 hour drives, and even on like Sundays, he would say like you have to listen to this chapter of this audiobook, or like we're listening to this audiobook or podcast on the way down to tournament. And I know one of the ones we read was I think it was Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it was a chapter about the compounding
Really?
effect of. I specifically remember I was in the driveway. I was wanting just to kick rocks that day, just do nothing and kick rocks. And Dad made me. He said, "You have to listen to this by the end of the day." And I was mad, and it's still like burnt in my head of Rich Dad Poor Dad. And it was a story about a dad investing in a bar in his basement, and then the other dad investing in like I think it was like health equipment or something, and then it was explaining the compound effect of like that dad investing time with his kids and how it played out in his work life. He's better at work, and then the other dad like being hungover and he had good times. It looked fun, and where they ended up, and just explaining compound effect. And I didn't pay any mind to that, but for some reason it stuck in my head, and over time I was able to like look back at that and like, well, it makes sense. Like
Hmm.
that's like decisions that's the perspective you have to have making these decisions. And so it's like I credit Dad so much because he forced me to listen to these things, and
Yeah.
I never did ever want to. I gave him probably so much attitude for it.
And
But like,
only one has to stick, right?
mhm,
Right. If you did 100 and you remember that one, it's paid for itself.
yeah. So
Yeah.
your
It's funny.
thoughts on it?
We also we get in cars and the kids are immediately like, no podcast, no podcast.
That's a good
And
imitation of it.
they're not old enough to understand the ones we're listening to now, but I'm hoping that it's going to sink in that daddy, whenever he gets a chance, he's learning, right? And hopefully they have that mindset that they gotta keep learning, and they can learn outside of institutions like schools and the formal things you think of.
I think that's a good idea. Leading by example, I think is the strongest form of leadership. It's something as parents, like you're like kids, you got to go to school and learn, but
Right,
they're at home on
right,
Facebook all night. It's like, well, you never have to learn. What are you learning? Like, why do I have to learn?
right.
Like, is it fun? Do they ever see their parents enjoy learning? Probably not. I would say a high percentage of kids never see their parents find enjoyment or explain learning in their shoes as a positive thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes me so mad is I think, like, how am I going to teach my kids how to budget? I think we could do a simple example where I give them $100 and I tell them, you're going to do a lemonade stand. What are you going to pay money for? Right, right. The lemons cost you this. The pitchers cost you this. Okay, at the end, how much did you make? All right. So you made $100 or you made $200, but you didn't really make $200, right? You spent 100. So you got to spend money to make money, and it's not all about how much you bring in, but it's how much you spend to bring that in. And then, okay, you made $100. It cost you 10 hours. How much did you make per hour? You could do that one day and one summer, and your kid would now have learned more about a business, budgeting, spending money, making money in that one day than I learned in all of high school. It's
Mhm.
crazy. It just infuriates me how simple it'd be for someone to teach this, and we never got to.
I think another important thing for kids to learn is to have a perspective of what money is worth. I think that's something I've
Oh yeah.
witnessed more than anything else is people like peers getting out of college, high school, and not understanding how far salary will go. I had there's a friend, not a friend of a friend, but they had an internship with this company, and they're making a good hourly wage at the internship, probably like $35 an hour, something like pretty good. And they're like, "Well, I'm gonna get an offer for like 175." And I'm like, no. Told my wife, I was like, "There's no way. I'm sorry, that's just not realistic." And they thought that till the day they got the offer for graduating, and it was like 55. I'm like, it's like what? It's so sad that they literally lack that perspective. That was never taught to them. Like,
Yeah.
even just do a search, right? But I don't think people like look at, understand how much people make to buy the things they buy. It's just not
Right.
taught. But it comes from a
Growing up,
generation. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, growing up, like if you made six figures, you were the rich kid in the neighborhood, right? Your dad or their dad was, right? And that was always a dream. Now six figures is kind of like,
The new like 60,000.
right? But you're right. I think that would be a great thing to add on the end of the lesson is like, okay, you made $100, right? Over 10 hours. Now go spend that $100 and see how far it goes.
Hmm.
Okay, so you bought 10 packs of Pokemon cards. Was it worth it? Right? Was working for a full day worth that? And that kind of teaches you what to spend it on. I think just like you can so easily just boil this huge complicated thing that you have to learn on the fly down to this little lesson and it'll take you so far.
Yeah, and I think so. Like, I'm more thinking about like older ages, like middle school and the high school. I think it's going to be very important for me to communicate like this is how much I make, this is how much our family makes, sorry.
Right.
Uh, This is what we can buy. This is how much we're saving. So if you want to have a life like this when you grow up, you're going to have to make this much money. You're going to have to have a job that makes this much money. You're going to have to save this much early on. And you don't have to consider inflation. I think like in high school,
Multiply that by 10%
I
each
think
year.
in high school especially, like you're at the age where you can understand that stuff. And I think that's interesting to everyone. Like, who doesn't like talking about money? I guess a lot of people don't. But like in a positive way, talking about money. Like, I don't know. I think kids are very ambitious, and like when you're like, hey, this is the type of jobs that you're going to have to get if you want the lifestyle you want.
Mm-hmm.
So what's it like? And it's that point of like working back. Like, what do you want? And let's work back. Like, what is it going to take to get there? So that's something it's so far, but it's something I plan to keep. It's something I feel like
Do
was
you have a
under.
list? It's funny. Maybe I'll have to go find it. I think it's in one of my notes, but do you have a list of things you're going to teach your kids like outside of the school system? I think I made a list. Listen to the podcast. I'd have to find
I
it.
don't think it's in paper or written down.
That'd be
Sure.
fun to do.
Yeah.
I had one of the my I learned something new on this one that I didn't know before. But there was a really interesting part, probably three-quarters of the way through, where he was talking about how your FICO score doesn't care how financially healthy you are. If you had $2 million in the bank, it doesn't care. Your FICO score cares about how much you've taken out debt wise and how much you've paid that debt. I never knew that. I always knew that like how well you paid your debts mattered in a credit score. I didn't know it was all of it. I didn't know that you could be filthy rich and it not care, or be dirt poor and not care. That blew my mind.
Yeah. I didn't know that either. But like, is it really that hard to have a good score? Like, is it really that big of a detail? Like, if you have $2 million in savings, like, do you really not have a 700 credit score? Like, did you not take on one car payment? Did you not take on one payment of any kind? Is it,
I'll give it to people. I think it's hard because it's like what makes up this number? It's like funny math, right? If it was clearly like the percentage at which you pay your debts, just an easy percentage number, I think more people would get it. But it's like this ambiguous number that the more you look at it, the worse it gets.
I agree. I think it is kind of a not a good system.
And I wonder how
Oh,
much it actually makes a difference. Like, if is the difference between an 800 credit score and a 700 credit score like a quarter of a percent on a mortgage, or is it like a full percent?
yeah,
I
I
don't even
don't
think I
know.
even know that.
I just know
Like,
I
what?
have a good credit score, and so I don't pay too much attention to it because it's not going to change. I'm not going to take on more debt to get a better credit score, and I don't know. I just stuff like that. I mean, I'm sorry because I'm like not wanting to go into detail about it, so maybe I'm just having a close mind to it. But I don't pay much attention to it because I think I do as good as I can in getting a good credit score. I'm not going to
Yeah.
go into debt to get a better. So sorry,
We're
I kind
looking
of
at
shot
re.
down.
No, that's all right. We're looking at refinancing right now, so it's really applicable
Yeah,
to
yeah.
how good of a rate we're going to get. And most of my time, I don't care because
You
I don't plan on going in massive debt.
are you waiting until next year to refinance, or are you going to pull the trigger sooner?
So I was going to wait, but I think the the 10-year yield is going up again, and now people are talking about. And this goes to one of those, like, when we started. It's like, if you want, you can go out and find people predicting interest rates are going to collapse over the next year, or vice versa. They're going to skyrocket. I'm kind of stuck. I don't know. We really wanted to refinance because our mortgage is too high of percentage of our salary right now. What our salary goes to, our budget essentially. So we are looking to get a lower rate to just help our cash flow. But now we're getting offers to refinance at a higher valuation, and it's it's really hard not to look at that six-figure offer. Like, we will evaluate your house six figures more. We've been in here for 15 months, right? That's a good return on that. And I just I'm starting to think it's a better bet that my house value, that money, like, if someone offered you $100,000 at 7% for free, would you take it? I think you would. I think you take it, you go get assets. I think they're going to do good in this highly inflationary environment coming. So I think that's what we're going to do is we're going to take the money, we're going to beef up our savings, but at the same time, we're going to go get some assets and bet that they're going to be better than this 7% we refinance at, or 6%, or whatever it's at right now.
Yeah, as long as you don't buy a car.
So it's funny because, I was thinking just like you were, I'm about to go buy a new car. We've outgrown it and we need to buy a new car. We've been looking at used. I think Ramsey would be proud of us. But I don't know. See, here's my thing with used cars is I know the state at which I returned my last car. I knew the transmission was a little like, any day now. I don't know. It's kind of, it's like, and they didn't recognize it when I sold it to them, and they're not going to disclose it when it goes out. They don't even know it. So it's like,
Well, don't buy a car from CarMax. Sorry to hear on CarMax, but we sold our car there, and
me
they
too.
offered way like 30% more than all the other trade-in values you're getting.
Yeah. I have more trust that, yes, I know it's not going to ever return as an asset, right? It's going to go down in value, but I'm trusting I'm getting good products more when it comes straight from the
Yeah, but
manufacturer.
also another thing to consider is like, so when you buy a car, like a new car is going to depreciate probably pretty standardly, like 10%, 7 to 12% maybe, somewhere in that range, right? Just
Well,
like
it's
new
like
cars in
10%
general.
the second you drive it off the lot.
Well, and you're paying that like 5,000 or $3,000 in fees, like stacking fees, all the real and dealership fees that don't come with the sticker price, right? So that's additional
But that's on used
depreciation.
cars too.
Not as much as new ones, I don't think. Maybe it is, but when you buy more expensive cars, that's a bigger number.
Yeah, if it's a percentage of fee, right? Yeah, I'm with
Yeah,
you. Yep.
the big difference between a 50,000 and $80,000 car. That 10%,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
it,
But
it really starts out.
there's a big difference in the car you get too, I think. Right? They both get you from point A to point B, but it's like investing in things that aren't money. Like Leslie and I's sanity may be on the line based on how well that car can entertain those kids.
The Chevys and the GMCs, they have Super Cruise as an option, but it's like really hard to find. Super Cruise is a
That's one of
hands-free
my
driving.
must-haves is the adaptive cruise.
So this isn't just adaptive cruise. Their Super Cruise is the full autonomous autopilot.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Interstate.
I'm fine not having the full self-driving.
Right.
I like it in a Tesla, but I also the full self-driving isn't that big a return to me. It's the adaptive cruise. It's not
That's
having
a
to pay attention to the brake pedal.
that's a interesting take. I'm surprised. I
Yeah,
thought you were
I
buying it
so
more.
like right now there's that full self-driving demo going on again. So this is the second time I've had it,
Mhm.
and it's every single trip. It's not good enough to not pay attention, and they make you pay attention, right? Because they have that camera in the cabin. You have to be looking forward, or it's gonna freak out on you. And so until it's good enough to where I don't have to pay attention, it's not a step function enough increase in convenience for me to think it's worth it. It's a step function increase to have adaptive cruise to like not have to pay attention to how far you are behind the vehicle in front of you. Right? It like lowers the attention span you have to dedicate extremely. Especially in all that stop and go and long distance trips and set the cruise and make sure you're staying in your lane. That's what matters to me.
All right. Well, you got anything else, or we go to takeaways here?
Let's wrap. I gotta go pee.
All right. You want to go first? Takeaway?
To me, it's that next summer we're doing a lemonade stand, and I'm gonna invest $100 to teach each kid, you know, how to budget for a business and look at profits, look at value of time and money. So we're doing that. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun idea too. I don't have a big one. I think the biggest thing is, I mean, it's kind of just a reiteration to me of just like go another layer deep into like the finances. Like how is that gonna affect the next thing? So not a very specific takeaway, more of a broad one. Yeah,
All right. Episode 7. Let's go,
episode
baby.
7.